And on the fifth day, Ohio State rested. That's the start of training camp. 4 days in the bag for the Buckeyes at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. Bill Landis, Jeremy Birmingham have been there for all four. I've been there for half of them, so I'm going to defer for the weekend assessments to these guys on the podcast daily to start this week. The Buckeyes are off. They're going to move into the check-in. They're going to move in and check into the hotel today, Monday. But start with you, Bill. What did you learn over the weekend?
I learned that I am growing. What's the right way to put it? I want to be fair, like cautiously optimistic about the offensive line. I just think they put on the shoulder pads on Saturday for the first time. Also had them on Sunday. Wasn't a full contact practice in the sense of tackling to the ground, but it's more or less real football kind of once you put the shoulder pads on, especially for the guys up front. Like they're really hitting each other and they're popping the pads. And I just thought the offensive line like kind of looked how you would hope they'd look on the first couple of days of doing that. I've seen enough practices at Ohio State over the last probably year and a half, 2 years, where the offensive line really got dominated by the defensive line. And that didn't happen in either of the days, Saturday or Sunday. It was a little back and forth, and I think that's fine, but there's some pretty standout performances, I think, from individual offensive linemen, maybe most notably Josh Simmons and Josh Fryer that have me pretty excited. They're still mixing things up on the interior. We can talk a little bit about that, but I would just say, like, generally, if anyone was out there watching practice the last 2 days, I think you'd feel pretty good about where the offensive line is headed, which is, probably not anything that anyone expected at this stage of camp.
Well, you should have. We said on Friday the offensive line looked like a unit that's actually coming together pretty nicely. They have a ton of experience. They're returning 5 guys who started college football games at Ohio State and Alabama last year. Like, it's not a group that should have the questions it does. And I'm glad to see that they are taking that step as a cohesive unit, even though they're still moving pieces around. For me, the biggest takeaways over the weekend are, A, to complete a pass on this Ohio State secondary requires almost perfection by the quarterback and the wide receiver. That is something that I think we knew coming in that they were going to be pretty good. But even when you drop down into the second and third team in the secondary, they are just very, very good and deep. And at the risk of putting on too much sunshine and rainbows, I think the quarterback play is going to be really good for Ohio State. And I'm seeing enough of the little things. There's still a lot of inconsistency, even for Will Howard, for Devin Brown, for Julian Sayin, who, Bill said on Sunday hit a little bit of a wall probably, and maybe had his worst day as a true freshman. But what you're seeing out of Will Howard specifically is the guy that we believe will be the starter is a player that seems very content with taking what a defense gives him and understanding he doesn't have to be a hero. But if then what you see on Saturday is when he has an opportunity to make a play, he has the ability to go 80 plus yards with his feet. And that is a different element that Ohio State has just not had. And when you couple that ability and the wide receiver play as good as it is, it's got a potential. Like, this team should be really freaking good, man. Like, that's not news to anybody, but even coaches talking to Jim Knowles on Friday, talking about how he said, I'm pretty happy with what I've seen so far, and they should be. But I think that the 2 areas of concern heading into camp were quarterback and offensive line. And for me, I feel 10 times better at both of those spots than I did a week ago.
It did seem like it was going to maybe take full pads or thudded practice or something more physical for Will Howard to like show maybe some differentiation between the rest of those guys and create separation that Ryan Day always talks about to name a starting quarterback, because like 7-on-7 work or even full team 11-on-11 when it's not live, like all 5 of these guys at Ohio State can throw the football. They didn't wind up quarterbacks with scholarships to play for Ryan Day by accident. And it's like they can all have periods where they look really good. They're all going to miss some throws against the secondary that Byrne mentioned is extremely elite. So when you guys were there on Saturday and I was following along from afar, it felt like maybe that sort of long touchdown run was the sort of thing that Will Howard, or the opportunity that Will Howard needed or was waiting for, maybe to show what could set him apart at quarterback. Was that how you felt, Bill?
Yeah, I thought so because it also came on a day where I thought he was throwing the ball well too. He did not during the two team periods on Saturday. He didn't throw an incomplete pass. The only time the ball ended up on the floor with Will Howard at quarterback was he threw a slant, or maybe it was like a shallow cross. Can't quite remember, to G Scott, and G Scott caught it and then got kind of hit as he was going to the ground and fumbled, but they still counted it as a completion because G Scott had to run a lap for fumbling the ball afterwards. So Will was very good kind of in almost every regard on Saturday, and the long run was sort of a punctuation for him. And it was a legitimate run too. It wasn't like they whistled there or they didn't whistle him down and he would have gotten tackled. I truly think if that were a real game and everything played out the same way, he would have ran away from Ohio State secondary. It was actually kind of surprising because where we were watching it from, it was on the far end of the field from us, kind of coming toward us. And I just saw Will kind of step to his left, I believe it was, and I thought he was going to hand the ball off. And then I just see this scrum of bodies, and then out pops the 6'5", 240-pound dude just zooming past everybody down the sideline. So yeah, it was really impressive. And he had a touchdown run like that with Kansas State last year. So it's not like it kind of came out of nowhere. He does have kind of deceptively long speed. But that's a separator for him, I think. I don't know that anyone else in the room can do something like that as effective as Will showed it on Saturday and has showed it in his career.
His ability to move outside of the pocket is a separator, but his ability to move inside of the pocket is a separator. Mm-hmm. And those are the two things. When you look at two quarterbacks, and at this point, I'm still going to couch it as Will Howard and Devin Brown. And I think Julian Sayin is certainly in the conversation to be the number 2 for Ohio State at some point in the season. But as Ohio State's working toward a starter, I think either way, the starter is Will Howard or Devin Brown. They're both inconsistent throwing the football in the short passing game. Devin is better in the long game and had a number of throws on Friday, Saturday, and I heard on Sunday the same, where he does have the ability to hit that home run, maybe a little bit better than Howard does. But Will Howard's pocket presence and his ability to make something out of nothing is invaluable for Ohio State in an offense that his job this year, the quarterback's job, is to keep the rest of the offense on the field. It's the ability and it's the need to pick up a 3rd and 3 with his legs and keep a drive going, which is a differentiator. And aside from that, Will Howard's athleticism is totally under discussed. He is not a big trotting, guy who's 6'5", 250 and can't run. Like, the dude can move. And so when you start to see it and you stack it up against Ohio State's secondary and realize that he can run away from the starting secondary, that's a real deal problem for college football.
I wonder if he should have been less humble about his athleticism when we started talking to him in January. And he's like, no, I can run. I'm going to run people over and I'm going to run away from them. He was like, no, I want to be a passer. I'm an NFL quarterback. He downplayed that conversation himself. And I think maybe with good reason. Humble is a good thing to be, but
no, he wants to be a passing quarterback. He wants to prove to people he can throw the ball. That's why he chose to stay in college football, right? I mean, it's not because he wants to. I don't think he wants to downplay his own athleticism, but he doesn't want people to think of him as just a guy who's incapable of throwing the ball accurately, and all he's good for is running, because he can throw it.
He did compare himself to Josh Allen, so maybe that's not that humble.
Yeah, and also I don't know that I'd go quite that far, especially when you're talking arm strength. I don't. Will's not throwing it down the field quite the same fashion as Josh Allen. I think the arm strength is noticeably better, but listen, when he's in games, he's going to throw deep balls where you're going to think to yourself, boy, that didn't look very good. So prepare yourself for that, because it's just not the strength of his game. But he does a lot really well. I think Berm is right on it with the pocket poise stuff, subtle movements, as we talked about before. He does look twitchier to me too than he did maybe at Kansas State. And now it comes with the caveat that guys can't actually hit him when they get near him. So I'm sure there have been plays in practice where he looks like he's escaping, but maybe it would not have been as easy as it looks. But I sense a increased quickness with him that I think has come with a pretty good summer of changing his body a little bit and working on that athleticism, which was already pretty good. So I think he's had a really good start to camp. I think we'll see. Ryan Day said 7 to 10 days he wants to name a starting quarterback, but we'll see if that actually happens this week or not. The one thing I have in the back of my mind is last year when they got to the scrimmage portions, that's when Devin Brown started to make a little bit of a move too. So I don't know that it's over. I'm not slamming the door shut necessarily, but I think Will has, almost certainly been the most consistent quarterback in the room through the first 4 practices.
Yeah, that seemed like where it was trending on Thursday and Friday. You mentioned, Bill, the rotation on the interior. It's a funny place for Ohio State to be. First of all, get into what you saw, and then second, it's like we still don't really know much about the depth of the tackles, but like the starting jobs there are more secure, and then there's question marks, and then the guards and centers, you're like, well, you can do whatever you want. There's like 7 options.
Yeah, well, I guess maybe start with the tackles. If there was any thought that Josh Fryer is not this team's right tackle, he takes every single snap at right tackle when the first team offense is out there. Josh Simmons and Josh Fryer are always on the field together. They're always out there with the first team offense. There is no shenanigans whatsoever with either of those 2 positions. But they are getting a little funky with the 3 inside spots. I think it's mostly to build some depth, to build some contingency plans. So you'll see, like, Luke Montgomery is playing a decent amount of center through these 4 practices. And there was a sequence on Sunday where the first team offensive line, where those 2 tackles, Luke Montgomery at center and Seth McLaughlin and Carson Hinsman at guard. And it was a day when Donovan Jackson was not doing a whole lot. But then there were other times where Austin Saraveld was running with the first team offensive line. So they're getting guys opportunities. I believe this is the first time we've actually seen Seth McLaughlin play guard. I know there's been some discussion about it. That this Sunday was the first time that I saw it with my own 2 eyes. I think he's had a pretty good camp. Just as a side note, I've been impressed with him, but the moving guys around, I don't think is coming from necessarily a place of uncertainty. I think it's just trying to build some depth and make sure you have guys with some experience should you need to slide some pieces around. But I would also say that kind of to a man, like those 3 that I mentioned on the interior, I would throw Tegra Shabola in there, and Donovan Jackson, who again didn't practice too much on Sunday, have looked pretty good. Like I was more concerned. I think a lot of people were more concerned with tackle depth than they were interior depth. But I think the interior depth has actually shown up in practice. I think there's like 4 or 5 guys there that look like they could play right now.
Yeah, and without question, the interior offensive line depth is actually pretty good. The question marks at tackle depth have not been abated at all. I mean, I think
I would agree with that.
I think that's actually a much bigger concern for me 4 practices in than it would have been. I think George Fitzpatrick has been okay. I think Zen Mahalski has continued to still be a weak spot for Ohio State when it comes to just his ability to keep guys out of the backfield. And again, a lot of times he's going up against Jack Sawyer or JT Tuimoloau or Kenyatta Jackson or Mitchell Melton. But either way, like it has not given you confidence that there's an answer after Fryer and Simmons, and that is a concern, especially considering the expectation is that both those guys will not be on this roster next year. So what happens at tackle this season, as long as those guys stay healthy, I don't think is an issue. I think you have, as we talked about on Friday, maybe one of the best tackle tandems in the country. But you know how my brain works. I like to look ahead, and I don't know that there's an answer behind those guys.
Okay. Take us over to the defensive side, Berm. Did anything stand out to you over the first 4 days?
My opinion is that Sonny Styles has looked far more comfortable than I thought he would for a guy that, you know, we know watching him a year ago when he did play closer to the line of scrimmage, like he certainly looked like he belonged there. I have 0 questions that he will be the starter next to Cody Simon at linebacker when Ohio State runs a 2 linebacker look. I've been really impressed with Arvell Reese and his ability to make plays. I don't know if he's a read and react guy in the middle or if he's just a attack guy like they see out of CJ Hicks, but he made a beautiful diving interception on Saturday. Like Arvell athletically is so different. And we've talked all offseason about the elevation in linebacker athleticism from a year ago to now. And it is very obvious. Beyond that, I continue to be super impressed by Jalen McClain. And I think that there's at least a conversation to be had where he's the number 3 safety on this roster right now, which I don't think people, when he was recruited and came in as a true freshman, really gave much thought to Jalen, but he's been excellent. Excellent.
Bill, so on Friday, Jim Knowles says, well, Sonny Styles and CJ Hicks, they're neck and neck there at will. Mm-hmm. And Jim Knowles is a pretty straight shooter. I'm not calling him a liar in any way, shape, or form. But what we saw was like 90% Sonny Styles next to Cody Simon on Thursday and Friday. Did that continue on Saturday and Sunday?
Yeah, it did. I don't recall, and it comes with the caveat that I don't see every single snap, so it's quite possible that it happened. But I don't recall seeing like a first team defense that had CJ Hicks and Cody Simon out there. There was some stuff on Saturday where they did have all three on the field. It was mostly during, I think, like teach periods and a couple of the split field team periods. They were definitely doing stuff with all three. So that was exciting to see. The nickel comes off the field when they do that. So there's a trade-off there, taking out Jordan Hancock, who I think if I'm making a list of the top 5 or 6 guys so far in camp, he's on it. He's had a really good couple days. So I don't really buy the neck and neck thing necessarily either. I continue to think think that CJ Hicks' role might be a little more specialized, depending on game situation, mostly like passing down kind of stuff, because Sonny does look pretty comfortable. Sonny had a really good day on Sunday. He was in the backfield a lot. It was one of those days like we saw in the spring. It maybe that's Student Appreciation Day when Jim Knowles is just like, I'm going to blitz on every single play. So it's like what's realistic and what's not. But you did notice Sonny in the backfield quite a bit. The linebackers, I think, collectively had a pretty good Sunday because of the situations that Jim Knowles is putting them in. But it seems like Sonny is kind of solidified. Like, I don't know. We're going to talk to James Laurinaitis this week. They're probably not going to put that fine of a point on it because you don't have to. But I think based off what we've seen, that is probably what you should expect, is to see a lot of Sonny there.
Yeah, and I think it was actually really encouraging. What we've learned out of Jim Knowles, or what we've picked up from him in his time at Ohio State, is he doesn't seem to be a coach speak type of guy. And when they say they want to find more ways to get the nickel off the field and play the 3 linebackers, I think that's because they believe that there's a role for CJ Hicks to be an impact player. So I don't think that necessarily it has to be him not telling the truth about the distance between the two of them, but saying, hey, there's still a role here for CJ. But I also think it leads to some interesting conversations, because the abilities that Mitchell Melton has as a pass rusher are different than anybody else on the roster. So,
he's so good, man. Good.
It's what we talked about a year ago. I mean, if you go back to snap judgments after games last year, there were people who were saying Mitchell Melton is our best pass rusher. And so now you have to find a way to get him on the field and CJ Hicks on the field. And that is almost always going to mean taking Jordan Hancock off the field, which is not something you really feel like you want to do. But when you have this many chess pieces, it makes perfect sense to do so.
Yeah, well, I think we'll get into a longer conversation about that on the podcast daily for Tuesday, which is going to be defense heavy. And Bill and I are going to get into some of the other things that Jim Knowles said about the scheme, because I think we have thoughts about that. But was there anything else on the field over the weekend, Bill, that caught your eye?
I want to say Mitchell Melton's name again because he was just in the backfield a lot. He is. I'm excited to talk to him whenever we talk to defensive linemen, which I actually think is later on in camp. Assuming we get to talk to him, just like about his thought process when he's pass rushing, because I feel like I never see him do the same thing twice, and he often wins. And that thing that I mentioned before about Josh Simmons saying how difficult he is to block, like, is stuck in my brain. So I am very excited to see what he could do for this defense this year. And then I guess I would just maybe one other thing is, it's sort of offensive line specific, but I think involves the running backs too. Obviously, is I think the run game looks pretty good. Like and it's not even schematic, because it's hard to pick up on the schematics from where we're watching it from. It just seems like there are a lot of lanes there. It seems like the running backs have been pretty decisive, and I include the 2 freshmen in that. You just see them getting loose for some long runs, but like not in a way that's alarming about the defense. It's not happening every single play. And also they're not tackling to the ground. So I understand that maybe you see a 50-yard run that would have actually been like a 12-yard run. But I just think there's some real explosive potential with this rushing attack that you're starting to get a little bit of a feel for. I hope that we can actually see some like real football in camp, whether that's later on this week on Thursday, or maybe if we get another opportunity the week after that, to see whether or not what we've seen in the first 4 days translates to when they're actually tackling. But I feel pretty good about where these running backs are and where the run game is headed. It just seems like it's all kind of synced up pretty well right now.
Yeah, that was my final thought, is that I actually think that the 4 running backs, yeah, you'd like to have 5, but these guys are really good. James Peoples and Sam Williams-Dixon have been an absolute revelation in what I've seen on the field, especially Sam Williams-Dixon. Like, there were so many questions about whether or not he would even play running back when he was recruited. And I think you're looking at a group of 4 that all those guys are going to play considerable minutes. And yes, there's a drop off between Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins and the other 2, but I can't, the comparisons with James Peoples and J.K. Dobbins when he was recruited were easy to make, being smallish from Texas, etc. James Peoples looks like he's in his 3rd year in his college football program. He is yoked, and Sam Williams-Dixon has an incredible first step out of the backfield, and those 2 are going to make a difference for Ohio State, and they're going to be impactful players.
They do. Just while we're on the topic of how many running backs they have, Rashid Cisse from Zanesville, the freshman walk on.
Muskingum.
That kid can play. I think when they got him as a walk on, they thought maybe more defensive back, and now he's at running back because he could do both. And he was, I think, a finalist for Mr. Football last year in Ohio. Yeah, he can definitely go. So, like, people who were excited about TC Caffey, and it sucks what happened to him. If you were hopeful that another walk-on might emerge to kind of fill that void, it looks like maybe Rashid Cisse could do that as a true freshman. And
if I can tie him into the recruiting side of things, Ohio State's attempting to flip a kid named Anthony Turbo Rogers from Alabama, he's a 5'9", 180-pound running back out of Alabama who's very different physically than what they have on the roster. Cisse is that type. So when you think about Chip Kelly and the old Oregon offenses, the LaMichael James types, the smaller scat backs, like that's the guy that they're looking to. So yeah, TC Caffey would be a nice, player to have available, but Cisse might be more what they're looking for stylistically to be a change of pace than Caffey would be, because the other guys are all kind of the same.
Well, there's no doubt we'll be looking closely at the running backs on Thursday. That's the next scheduled open practice for us. There will be full pads, expecting some full contact action. So the countdown is on for that. The Buckeyes are off on Monday. Hotel check-in. Firm will not be taking pictures. I just want to make that clear. Do you want to tell them
we've got multiple days of pictures already. We don't need to see what guys are wearing when they walk into the hotel. I understand other media outlets will be there. I appreciate the diligence, but I don't think at this point in our lives we need to take photos of grown men walking into a hotel. I think we're past it. I understand why this was important 20 years ago when we didn't ever get to see the guys throughout the year. We didn't have, but not anymore. I just don't need to do it.
So there will not be coverage of that, but we will be at Roosters on Henderson Road later on today, Monday. Looking forward to getting back in there and talking about camp with those guys. Media availability on Tuesday, Wednesday.
Johnny Dixon joining us at Roosters. That's going to be fun.
Okay. Didn't know if that was officially locked in, but that'll be a big one. He's got a book out, so we'll talk about all that and everything else as camp ramps up and we get ready. What do we got? 26 days until the opener for Ohio State. We'll have podcast daily for you all month long to get ready for it. That's Bill Landis and Jeremy Birmingham. I am Austin Ward. We'll talk to you later.